The Palestinian Health Authority says at least 5 Palestinians have been killed and dozens more wounded as an Israeli raid sparked a gun battle in the occupied West Bank city of Jenin. The Israeli Defense Force says it entered the city to arrest what it said were wanted suspects and that 7 of its troops had been injured. Israel's military sent attack helicopters into the area for the first time in a decade. Well, our Jerusalem correspondent Rebecca Ritters talked me through the reactions.
That hours-long operation, more than 10 hours long, in fact, operation has now come to an end. Sadly, that death toll on the Palestinian side has risen to 5, as you're reporting. One, including a minor, a 15-year-old boy, also caught up in that attack or died in that attack. There are dozens more have been injured, in fact, including also another minor, a 15-year-old girl. She's in a critical condition. Many of them are in critical condition, so there's, of course, a fear that that death toll will rise. As you mentioned, on the Israeli side, we've seen 5 border police were injured and 2 Israeli soldiers, 2 IDF soldiers. They've been airlifted to hospital. Now, this, of course, all came during an overnight raid, what's called as a routine operation in Jenin to extract, as you say, or to arrest 2 wanted suspects, one reportedly from Hamas, the other with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. It is believed that those 2 men have been arrested. Now, they came under fire. The Israeli army came under fire, and they're saying that ensued a massive gun battle. And during that operation, as they were trying to extract themselves, the Israeli army, that is, the IDF, shortly after about 7 a.m., one of their vehicles was struck by an IED, a roadside bomb, and that caused damage. It injured one of the soldiers and then left them with this operation where they needed to move into an extraction mode. That saw the deployment of helicopters, as you mentioned in your lead-in there, and that's something we haven't seen for decades, and that definitely does show an escalation in this raid as opposed to other ones. The helicopters were apparently there to try and clear the area so that the IDF could get their hardware and soldiers out. These raids are common. They happen on an almost nightly basis across the West Bank, particularly in the north. But something of this scale is not seen that often and does show a severe escalation.
Rebecca Ritters in Jerusalem. We'll take a look now at some more stories making headlines around the world. We'll start in the UK, where lawmakers are debating an official inquiry that found former Prime Minister Boris Johnson deliberately misled Parliament about parties held during the COVID-19 lockdown. Mr Johnson's not attending after resigning from Parliament when the findings were announced. Members are expected to back the inquiry and block his future access to Parliament. The BBC has cast doubt on Greece's account of a shipwreck in which more than 500 migrants are feared to have died. The British broadcaster says it has found tracking data showing the vessel didn't move for hours before it sank, suggesting that it was already in distress. The Coast Guard says the boat did not need assistance. Moscow has turned down assistance from the United Nations in Russian-held areas of Ukraine affected by the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam. Moscow says it's because of security concerns. Russia has warned that receding waters are raising the risk of mosquito-borne disease. Well, jailed Russian opposition leader Alexey Navalny has gone on trial on fresh extremism charges that could see him imprisoned for decades. The trial's taking place at a maximum security prison where the Kremlin critic is already serving a 9-year sentence for alleged fraud. Investigators now accuse him of creating and financing an extremist group. But some of Mr Navalny's most vocal supporters haven't been deterred. DW caught up with one of them.
Protests in Russia always seem to end with images like this. The demonstrators who took to the streets to celebrate Alexey Navalny's birthday this month already knew they would probably be detained. Yevgenia Ostapenko was one of them. She took to Moscow's Red Square to call for freedom for political prisoners. The 27-year-old was arrested and spent a night in jail for her support of Navalny. She was lucky to get away with an administrative fine.
I support Alexey Navalny because I think he's a politician who's prepared to talk openly and honestly about the problems in our country. Problems like corruption, the lack of democratic change in Russia's leadership, and people's living conditions.
Yevgenia first started supporting Alexey Navalny after watching his corruption investigations into Russian politicians online, including the viral video about Vladimir Putin's alleged palace. Alexey Navalny has been in prison since 2021 on charges many believe are politically motivated. This year, his lawyers have complained that he's often held in solitary confinement and has been suffering from severe health problems. Russian investigators have now opened further cases accusing the politician of extremism and terrorism. The authorities have made any association with him dangerous, experts say.
If you're an active supporter of Alexey Navalny, for example, someone who takes part in protests, you could end up in jail the day after you go out and demonstrate. And if you're a supporter and you post something on social media that has anything to do with Alexey Navalny, that means the authorities and security services who are monitoring Russian citizens will have you on their radar. And any misstep on your part will be enough to get you into trouble.
Yevgenia Ostapenko never worked in Navalny's offices or for his anti-corruption foundation, which have both already been labeled extremist. But she knows that the authorities are watching supporters like her too. Yevgenia attended a protest back in 2021 and was detained a week later. Police said they found her using Moscow's network of facial recognition cameras.
I don't plan to stop expressing my political opinion. I plan to talk about it bravely, honestly and openly. And I want to prove that that is possible. I have rights that are outlined in the Russian constitution. Those rights are guaranteed, and the government cannot deprive me of them.
Underneath the veneer of normality, stories like Yevgenia's are being repeated across Russia. The Kremlin has been cracking down on all critical voices, especially since launching the full-scale war in Ukraine, making fear part of the fabric of everyday life.
Well, I asked DW's Russia analyst Konstantin Eggert why Russian authorities are bringing these new charges against Mr Navalny now.
Well, I think that during this time of full-scale invasion, when basically Russia is in any remains of legality are gone through the window, I think they just want to finish Navalny off, to be very blunt. They want to put him behind bars for such a period of time that, as a politician, he will cease to exist. I think this is the calculation and this is the plan behind all these absolutely fantastic fabricated charges of extremism and terrorism and support for the Nazis.
OK, you sounds like you've answered what was to be my second question, the presumption being that this trial is both politically motivated and rigged.
Absolutely, and we've seen just essentially less than an hour ago that this trial has been made closed, and even Navalny's parents can no longer follow it. All journalists were kicked out of the room where they were watching the proceedings on the screen, not in the courtroom, on the screen. And that means that the last pretense of legality is gone. Anything can be done now behind closed doors by essentially not the judge, who means nothing, but by the FSB and Putin, who are wrecking this ball against Navalny.
Alexey Navalny's been in prison since 2021 and his opposition organisation outlawed in Russia. So how big a role does he still play in it and indeed in generally in opposition?
Well, you see, as long as the authorities fear him, he plays a role. And this is why the authorities are trying to put him behind bars for as long as possible. They fear his organizational skills. They fear that he touches upon certain segments of the population that are enraged by corruption, for example, and not so much, for example, against Putin's war in Ukraine. This is also a constituency. So they don't like the idea that Navalny has been around for too long as a politician and an effective politician, and they just want to put an end to that.
Thank you for that, Konstantin. Our Russia analyst, Konstantin Eggert.
Thank you.